Everybody hear me now? No? Now? Okay. Thank you.
No, I'm cool, yeah.
How about now? All right, well, let's get started. Thank you all for being here to see this wonderful film, Oscar-nominated film.
Oh, there we go.
Whoa! All right, we've got two of the nominees here, producer Dede Gardner and writer-director Sarah Polley. Nice crowd today, huh?
Yeah, thank you for coming out on Wednesday to Crescent Drive.
This is one of my favorite movies of the year. I've spoken to both of you about it before. And one theme that's come up in our conversations, which is very true to the spirit of the movie, is collaboration. And so to start, I wondered if you two could talk a little bit about your own collaboration, how you came together for this movie, and what your work on it together looked like. Who wants to start?
We love each other.
Yeah,
Middle.
no one's gonna know I
Middle.
love you. Oh,
Hello? Yeah, we do love each other. So I read the book and fell in love with it, and I found out that Dede and Frances McDormand had the rights. I'd always wanted to work with Dede and Frances, and I reached out through my manager, Frank Federal. He was also Fran's manager, and I said, do they have a writer-director for this yet? And the same day, they reached out to get in touch with me. So it felt like the whole project and the relationship was kind of faded in some way, and it was full of that kind of charmed quality, I think.
And yeah, the only thing I'd add is that then we had an extra year because of COVID, which I don't think is a blessing in almost every respect. But in this case, I feel like it was. We just had this extra year. We were already linked, we were already ready to make it, and then we had to wait. And so we had a year to talk, and we would Zoom and talk and Zoom and talk and Zoom and talk, and we talk about cast, and I think you met way more actors than you ever would have, and we plotted different tapestries of the cast, and we worked on the script, and we talked about different ways to make it. It was totally luxurious. But it was also friendship building.
To put Sarah on the spot a little, Dede,
Yeah.
really beautiful job with this adaptation. What was your familiarity with her work, and what made her the right person to make this movie?
I've wanted to work with Sarah for a very long time, but I think two things were specific to my thinking about her for this. One was that I didn't think it was a mistake that she was a Canadian. Miriam Taves, the author, is a Canadian, meaning I didn't think it was a mistake for the movie. And the Mennonite colonies up there and the way in which they are inside and embedded and proximate to the everyday life is not what we have here, and it felt really, I had this gut instinct that was essential, that someone who had lived that way and proximate to those communities would be more devoted to not otherizing them, right? To just keeping them in the main vein of like the human experiment, as opposed to suggesting that they live on the margins or the fringes. And the second thing is that Miriam's book begins with a one-page prologue. The book is based on real-life events that happened in a colony in Bolivia. And at the end, two things happen in that prologue. One is that she talks about the real events, and she says that the women to whom this had happened were accused of many things. They were accused of being derelict in their faith. They were accused of visitations from Satan. They were accused of wild female imagination. And at the end of the prologue, she says, what follows is an act of wild female imagination, as a reclamation, if you will, of imagination as the superpower. And, sorry for being long-winded, I think stories we tell is like one of the great jujitsu feats of imagination I've ever seen in my life. And I thought, oh, I need someone who has like a wild female imagination. So that's why.
Sarah, you're nominated for your screenplay of this film. that, can you walk us through what you saw in it as a movie and what the process of narrowing it down, expanding it, and bringing your own vision to it looked like?
Yeah, so what I loved about the experience of reading the book is it moved like a bullet, and it didn't linger, and it was so concentrated that every scene was about so many things. So I really wanted to capture that idea of every scene having multiple functions and the tension that created. I think also just this notion of this radical act of democracy of people who disagree on fundamental things having to sit in a room together and find their way forward was thrilling to me, especially in this world where we're increasingly all in our corners shaking our narratives at each other and not listening. The fact that people actually had to change their mind in real time and persuade and be persuaded was so exhilarating to me. And this idea also of what's next and what's forward and how do we move past this moment instead of only sitting in the sort of identifying of the harms. In terms of the screenwriting process, I had to be really rigorous. It meant so many drafts. I mean, I can't even count how many drafts I wrote of this script. At some point, I wrote a draft, 2 drafts in fact, from each character's point of view as though they were the only character I cared about, so that every scene had to be funneled through. So even scenes where something's happening on the other side of the room and somebody isn't saying anything, what's happening is fundamentally transforming them too and shifting them. So just not losing the thread on each character, in part for the screenplay and in part so that I could answer those questions that were inevitably going to come up from all of those actors.
And then in terms of the scope of your filmmaking, of the production, you have Dede Gardner, Frances McDormand, 2 powerhouse Oscar-winning producers. But what did that collaboration really look like in terms of getting what you needed and figuring out how to make this movie, how to give it the scope that I think is so powerful? And to me, it was really surprising when I saw it in the best way, that it had that grandeur.
I mean, the thing about this movie is it's really produced, and I don't think I'd ever known what that was and what producing could look like, which meant I felt protected, I felt fought for, I felt challenged, I felt pushed and respected in the same breath. And I think that the 3 of us developed was this sort of capacity for these wild, rich conversations that went into our lives and then back into the film and into our lives and back into the film. And our relationships transformed through the process and also went through many phases. And I think that was like one of the most exciting things is now there are these relationships that have so many layers to them, so much experience behind them. But also, Dede is someone who's like so respected also, so you go into a room with people who have money and say what you need, and people really listen to Dede. There's a track record and also I think Dede really operates a lot on intuition, and so there's this confidence that comes with that, or there's this spidey sense about things that you have the confidence to follow, which is a very unusual thing, I think, to find in any collaborator.
Dede, can you speak to that at all, particularly for a movie like this, which it's safe to say Hollywood has not made a movie like this before, and I wonder how difficult it was to ask for those kinds of things and what that looked like on your end.
Well, we had a pretty extraordinary relationship with MGM and UAR, and I was in a position to make a movie at a certain budget level, and if I kept it there, I could go make it. And my intention was always to use that opportunity for something that would not get made otherwise, or would be told like you could have $5 million to make it or something, right? Like an impossible scenario. But we had amazing partners. We really did. People I've worked with for a long, long time, and I think sometimes the game is, part of it is like creating a safe harbor and keeping everyone out of it until you want them in there, right? And that might be longer than they want, but that's what happens. Things take what they take. And I also think part of it is reminding people along the way, keep reminding people along the way of the original intention. Like, I think people get so distracted by chaos or fear or dismay or something not working yet, And then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, and it's like memory banks get wiped. You go, no, wait, we're still doing the same thing. We're still on the same endeavor. But I really believed in this, in her and it. I just did. I just knew. I mean, it was stubborn as fuck, right? Like, really, it kind of like threw up some flares, but you just keep going, and you'd like love it. You just like love it and love it and love it and love it and love it, and then there it is.
I'd love for both of you to talk about putting this cast together. It's one of those movies where you cannot imagine it with any other combination of actors when you see it. The energies are so perfect, the way they play off of one another, as well as the individual performances, which are incredibly strong. How did you go about putting this together? Because Sarah, I know you talked about needing to put it together as a company and not assemble it individually.
I mean, we had a lot of time, and we had, an amazing group of people to talk it through with. So between Dede and Fran and my brother John Buchan, who's one of my casting directors, it was just this round table. And for me, it was educating myself. Like, I've been living in a cave for 10 years, so getting to know all of the amazing actors who had kind of sprung up in the last 10 years and deeply educating myself about their bodies of work, meeting with people I'd also never heard of. My mom was a casting director, and so I grew up with conversations about actors, and my brother is very much in her lineage of looking for not what an actor has done before, but what it might be exciting for them to play, and what might the challenge be, what have they not had the opportunity to do yet, and also just trying to cast this community as an organism. So we really couldn't cast one person until we cast everybody, because they had to function as this community. We also were deeply interested in what dynamic a person was going to bring to a group. Like, was this a person who was not only great for this part, but who could actually sit off camera for 3 days at a time and be okay with that, or share a green room with everyone and not have a trailer and make space for other actors. So that also became a key component of putting together this group.
Those are people that Fran and I described as too big for the hayloft.
Like, no room for her in the hayloft.
Understood.
We have this bizarro alternate hayloft that we actually cast in our minds, which one day we'll share on 30 years.
One day.
Please, just drop it on Twitter, log on for a week. Not to say he's played this exact role before, but this did feel like the role Ben wished I was born to play.
He was the one person we did
I was
cast
gonna say.
individually and frankly first.
Yeah.
We just knew,
Yeah,
we all
knew.
just knew.
Yeah.
It's in the eyes, it's in the voice, yeah, it's everything. I want to talk a little bit about hope, because one of perhaps the challenges of selling a movie like this is it deals with very intense subject matter, very important subject matter, but it leaves you on this incredibly hopeful feeling. And that is, again, a credit to the screenplay, as well as the direction. But Sarah, how did you go about steering it to that uplift at the end?
And I think that sense of hope came in increments. It was certainly a first intention that we lead with some sense of a way forward, that this be about this forward movement and about what we want to build, not only what we want to destroy, as Ona says. But I think that grew, especially as we entered the editing room and realized as a group that we needed to change the narrator from the Ben Whishaw character, which is what it was in the novel, to the youngest woman in the room. And then suddenly what we have is this narration of someone telling a story to an unborn child. And even if you're not really aware of the context of the voiceover when you're first hearing it, there is a sense that there is something in the future, that this isn't the final place they're going to be. And so I think that helped inject the film with a sense that we might be going somewhere. But I always saw that last scene as needing to feel like this epic climax of an epic story in the way that we've probably seen male stories told in the past of this, and also the idea of Exodus and this sense that it had to be this magnificent feat that they were going to attempt this journey to a different world.
Dede, what do you remember about those conversations? I'm curious if you remember when you guys settled on that incredible last line, which just hits you right in the heart?
Yeah, I think it was that I had written that narration line of "this story ends before you were born" at the beginning because I actually thought it was really important to know, again, how we were from the future. And then it felt to me like whatever that last line was had to speak to that first line. So your story will be different than ours. And I think also I have 3 little kids, and I think that's actually given me an enormous amount of optimism alongside fear. And so there was some sense that also in just going to make this movie, I haven't made a film since they were born, that this is about building something, and this felt like something I wanted to make for them.
Very much take this question as you take a question. But you've been sharing this film for several months now, since you premiered it in Telluride. How have you found the conversations you've had with folks who've seen it, and how have you found the way it's impacted them and the way perhaps that has in turn impacted you, but for both of you?
I've been very moved by it. I think its applicability or the extent to which the aperture is wide has been really striking to me. I mean, I always want it wider, but
Oscar nominations up.
but yeah, no, I think the movies. I mean, in some ways, I think we go through the choice of do we do nothing, do we stay and fight, or do we leave about a dozen times a day. So I don't think we're as far afield from its discussion as we might think based on its specificity. And I also, I've been very interested in watching people watch something in which they see someone change their minds and how totally stunning that has been to people. And I think, oh right, because that just doesn't happen.
I mean, I've loved the experience, and I feel like people are always talking about how they're kind of weary at this point of the process of releasing a film. I feel so invigorated by it. I love it. Well, it's just been so interesting because I think half the things I say about the film now are actually things people have said to me after seeing the film, of how they mapped their own experience onto it, things they've seen in it that we didn't know were there. So it's just been like really wonderful, and also just the range of people. Like I've been really fascinated by a lot of men under 30 and their incredibly emotional responses to the film and what they've said to me afterwards. And I think that has all been really helpful in just adding to my own sense of faith in some kind of future.
On that note, we have time for a few audience questions if anyone would like to ask Sarah or Dede something. Don't be shy. Yes.
I was wondering, I was really struck by the cinematography, and I'm wondering if it was the DP's idea to shoot it the way it was shot, or was he directed to create that look?
I mean, so Luc Montpellier is my cinematographer, and we've worked together on pretty much every film I've ever made, except for Stories We Tell. And I mean, I think that my first instinct was I was really inspired by the photos of Larry Towell, who's an incredible photographer who did this incredible series on Mennonites and shot them with such respect. And they're black and white. And so we originally were thinking about the film in black and white. And when we started to test that, weirdly, when the images were moving, that felt very judgmental to me. It felt like we were sort of distancing ourselves in a way that I was uncomfortable with. But it didn't feel to me that it should ever feel like some kind of like docudrama. It had to feel in the realm of a fable. There's a heightened reality to it. And I got really interested in the idea of if it felt kind of black and white and every now and then you were kind of surprised to see color seep through, and this idea of a faded postcard of a world that had already passed, that there's already a sense of it being gone because the very act of this conversation consigns this world to the past even by its very beginning. So it was a collaborative process of finding the degree of desaturation, but this idea, first of all, of shooting in 2.76 and this sort of old-fashioned epic scale, and that idea of the desaturation, that was sort of from the beginning in our conversation. So I would say it was very collaborative. process of finding that. Thank you.
Yes, in the back.
Kind of like follow up the previous question. So even like the colors, like desaturation, there's still a lot of detail in the costume. Like the dress that women wear, like there's a different in color, different in pattern. So just like my question is about that. Yeah.
I think this is about the costumes and the differences between the costumes and the details of it, and thank you for bringing that up because our costume designer, Keita Alfred, was our MVP on this film, and she was the source of so much of our research. She had deep roots in the Mennonite community, and with a lot of the background performers are actually wearing Mennonite dresses from these colonies in South America that migrant workers were bringing up with them and giving to our production, so that money went directly into the hands of those women in those colonies. And she worked so hard on figuring out the families and how we could subtly define them from each other and finding details in Mennonite communities like, you know, if you get a swatch of fabric that you might make 3 dresses the same. So I appreciate that you noticed her work because it was so rigorous and detailed, and she also brought with her such integrity in terms of how we represent these communities and needing to be respectful.
Yes, in the back.
I love hearing you speak about the process of making this film in addition to the final product. I know that there was an on-set therapist that worked with the cast and crew, and I just wondered if you could speak at all to the intentionality of protecting cast and crew as you were developing a film with this subject matter.
Sure, thank you so much. So Dr. Lori Haskell was our on-set therapist, and she specializes in what trauma does to the brain, specifically around sexual assault. And so she gives a workshop ahead of time, and then she was on set for our more difficult scenes because not just for cast, but also, you know, I've known my crew for decades. Some of them come from really difficult histories of abuse, both men and women on set. And so I really wanted to have this safeguard for them if things were difficult. So we had her on set. She was available by phone when she wasn't there. And there was a rule also that you could take a break whenever you needed to, whether you be crew or cast, you could walk away for some time and we wouldn't rush back. What was exceptional about it wasn't having the idea, it was having a producer that didn't blink at that idea. So when I raised it with Dede, I was very nervous because whenever I've asked for something unorthodox in the past, it's always met with resistance. And Dede just paused for a minute and went, yeah, well, we'll just move the money from somewhere, but yeah, no problem, I've done that before. So, and yeah, maybe you want to speak to that, because you had already had a therapist on set before.
We had someone on Underground Railroad who was so essential to everyone over a series of months. It just, I actually can't imagine going forward without, at the very least, making it available. I certainly had it on She Said, I had it on, it makes so much sense to me. My only regret is I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that it's totally reasonable and necessary. But, you know, inch by inch as we go.
Where was the film shot?
Toronto.
Yeah, all around Toronto, and the fields were about an hour and a half outside of Toronto in a place called Pickering. And then the barn was also built in a studio in a convention center that wasn't being used because of COVID.
Yes, in the back there. Yeah.
I have a question, but first of all, as a mental health professional, thank you for acknowledging having someone on staff. I presume that you've gotten feedback from women or children or men that were part of that community or other communities that might have been isolated or insular like that. And what type of feedback have you gotten?
Yeah, so we had Mennonite consultants at every stage. So before the script process, during the script process, at various points during the shoot, and then we showed a cut to a group of Mennonite women and got their feedback on it. It's been overwhelmingly positive. I was very nervous. We did do a lot of work trying to make sure it was respectful, but you never know. But actually, I just heard this really amazing report yesterday that, because the women in these types of communities that are so conservative, unless they've left, so we've had a lot of people who've lived in these communities, you know, who are our consultants, but not people who live in them actively. But the ones who live actively in these communities, you know, they don't have access to technology. They've certainly never been to movie theaters. That's just not part of their world. They're not going to read a newspaper or go online. But Kita told me that a group of Mennonite women from a really conservative colony in Manitoba who had never been to a movie theater in their lives went to see it recently, broke all the rules and went to see it, and then they went back and another bigger group went the next day, and so there were all these buggies in the parking lot of the cinema, which was just amazing because they'd never been to a movie before, and clearly, I mean, we don't know, but the fact that so many more came back the next day implies that, you know, they're not furious about the film, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we've heard from other, you know, there were 2 women we spoke to early who had left a very religious community in BC, I think, and felt a lot of despair and felt like they had to go back, and then saw the movie and said, you know what I realized is we can just rebuild it ourselves. And then we had a reaction from someone in a different community from New York, a very religious community, and so I do think it's probably not, you know, scores and scores of people going, but like I think people who have, or people who grew up that way and aren't living that way anymore, I think it holds a really central place of recognition. Yeah.
Time for one more question, if anyone's got one. Yes, you.
So this was an incredibly beautiful film, very emotional and profound, and I enjoy every single second of it, and we cried a lot. But I also am curious about the Monkeys song, and what led you to bring that into the film, and what effect you intended it to have, and just everything surrounding that choice.
Sure, thank you for the question. I'd love to hear what your response is afterwards, but I mean, I think that we talked a lot about how long can we get away with people not actually knowing how recent this is. So this sense that there'd be a jolt at some point where you realize it's more recent than you think, it's closer than you think, it's not so far away from you than you think. These issues, however obscure this might seem to you in terms of this community. We played a lot about with what song it would be in the novel. The census truck driver's playing California Dreaming, and we had that there for a while. But there was a sense of longing in that song that almost felt too close. And it felt like it just needed to feel like a burst of joy, and almost a signpost that you can feel permission to feel whatever you want. If you need to laugh in this film, you're also allowed to do that at various points. So to not be prescriptive, but to also get a sense of that joy and forward momentum. And there was an incongruity with it that I was also really interested in, but I'm curious, like, what was the impact that it had on you? Did it work or did it not work?
It was depending on the scene that it came up in. The ending, when it came on during the credits, it was like, it kind of played into that feeling of hope and going forward.
Okay, good, okay.
Came back, oh yeah, no, it was lovely every time.
I thought I was going to get like that's great, that was your intention, but it didn't work. Which I was interested in, genuinely.
No, and also Sarah called me and was like, I'm sending you something, we tried something, just like listen or watch. And no one knows this, I was obsessed with the Monkeys. like genuinely, I was gonna marry Mickey Dolenz, and like it was all gonna be fine, and they were my people. And I understood them, and they understood me, and it was really good. And I called Sarah, I was like, I don't know what to do. So there it is.
And on that note, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you.